You have heard her name before, Bathsheba. And the moment you heard it, something was already decided for you. The story was already framed. The woman on the rooftop, the object of a king's gaze, the passive figure in someone else's narrative of desire and downfall. But here is what no one ever told you about that story, and what Carl Jung understood about every woman whose power was rewritten into someone else's plot. The framing was never about her. It was about containing something that could not be controlled, a specific kind of feminine power so disruptive, so quietly commanding, that the only way to manage it was to make her a footnote in a man's moral lesson. And if you have ever felt that, if you have ever sensed that the version of you the world tells back to you is somehow smaller, flatter, less dangerous than what you actually carry, then this is not ancient history. This is your life, right now. There are women walking through the world today who carry this same frequency, a presence that rewrites rooms, a knowing that unsettles without raising its voice, a depth that others find simultaneously magnetic and threatening. And the response from the world is always the same: reduce her, reframe her, make her story about someone else. Jung had a name for what happens when a culture encounters a power it cannot integrate. He called it shadow projection. And for certain women, Bathsheba women, the entire weight of collective shadow lands on their shoulders. This video reveals 7 signs that you carry this kind of power. Not ego, not vanity. Something far older and far more dangerous to systems that depend on your silence. To understand what a Bathsheba woman actually is, you have to first understand what was done to the original story and why. The biblical account gives us roughly 11 verses. 11 verses to contain an entire woman's existence. And in those verses, she never speaks until spoken to. She never chooses until chosen. She is seen from above, literally, by a king on his rooftop. And from that moment, her agency vanishes from the text. But look closer. Before David ever saw her, Bathsheba was the granddaughter of Ahithophel, one of the most brilliant political advisors in Israelite history. She was married to Uriah, one of David's most elite warriors. She existed at the intersection of intellectual lineage and military power. She was not a nobody on a rooftop. She was someone whose connections alone made her formidable. And after the tragedy, after David's abuse of power, after Uriah's murder, after the death of her first child, she ensures that her son Solomon becomes king, not through seduction, not through manipulation as the simplified narrative suggests, through strategic political maneuvering that outplayed every other contender in a brutal succession crisis. She won, quietly, completely. And history still calls her the woman David saw bathing. This is not an accident. This is a pattern. Jung observed it across every mythology he studied, when feminine power operates at a level that threatens the existing order. The collective psyche responds not by destroying it, that would acknowledge its strength, but by rewriting it, by making the powerful woman a supporting character in someone else's story, a cautionary tale, a temptress, a victim, anything but what she actually was, sovereign. Tell me in the comments, when was the first time you realized that the story being told about you was not actually your story? When did you first sense that gap between who you know yourself to be and who the world insists you are? Write it below. You do not need to have it fully articulated. Sometimes just naming the moment, just pointing to it and saying, there, That is where the rewriting began, is the first act of reclaiming your own narrative. That act of naming is not small. It is the precise reversal of what was done to Bathsheba, the refusal to let someone else hold the pen. If this is the kind of depth you want to keep encountering, subscribe. What comes next goes further into the 7 signs themselves, and each one will land differently once you have named your own moment of recognition. The first sign that you carry Bathsheba power is that your mere presence creates disturbance, and you have never understood why. You walk into a room and the energy shifts, not because you are loud, not because you demand attention. Often, you are the quietest person there. But something about your frequency, your groundedness, your refusal to perform smallness, activates discomfort in others. You have watched it happen. Conversations change direction when you sit down. People become self-conscious. Women you have never spoken to decide they dislike you. Men become either fixated or avoidant, rarely neutral. And you have spent years wondering what you are doing wrong. You are doing nothing wrong. What you are doing is existing at a frequency that forces others to confront their own inauthenticity. Your presence is a mirror, not because you are judging them, but because your groundedness makes their performance visible to themselves. And that is deeply uncomfortable for people who have built their entire identity on performance. Jung described this as the shadow activation effect. Certain individuals carry such a high degree of psychological integration that their mere presence activates the shadow material in others. The people around them suddenly become aware of their own masks, their own compromises, their own unlived lives. And instead of taking responsibility for that discomfort, they project it outward onto the person who triggered it. This is why you have been called intimidating when you were simply being still. This is why you have been called cold when you were simply being boundaried. This is why people have reacted to you with intensity that seemed completely disproportionate to anything you actually did. You did not do anything. You were something. And that was enough to disturb the entire room. The second sign is that your silence communicates more powerfully than most people's speech. You have noticed this. When you choose not to respond, when you hold back instead of filling the space with words, people become agitated. They rush to fill the silence you created. They interpret your quietness as judgment, as disapproval, as power being wielded against them. And in a way, they are right. Not because you intend it as a weapon, but because in a world where most people speak to avoid feeling, your willingness to simply be present in silence is radical. It exposes the anxiety beneath the chatter. It reveals how much of what people say is not communication. It is self-soothing. Jung understood that the self, the deepest center of the psyche, communicates not through noise, but through presence. The woman who has access to this level of herself does not need to argue, convince, or explain. And that field either draws people in or repels them, depending entirely on whether they can tolerate their own depth. You have been told you are too quiet. You have been told you need to open up more, share more, make yourself more accessible. But what they are really saying is, your containment frightens me. Your ability to hold something without spilling it makes me feel exposed. The Bathsheba woman does not speak to fill space. She speaks when speech serves. And in between, her silence does the work that 1,000 words from lesser sources could never accomplish. The third sign is perhaps the strangest. People tell you things they have never told anyone else, often within minutes of meeting you. They reveal secrets, fears, shames that have been locked inside them for years. And they do this not because you asked, not because you probed, but because something about your presence creates a container so safe, so spacious, that what has been held in darkness finally feels permission to emerge into light. This is not a social skill. This is not active listening technique. This is the signature of someone whose psyche has developed the capacity to hold shadow material, not just their own, but the shadow material of others. Jung called this the phenomenon of constellation. When an archetype becomes active in one person, it activates the corresponding material in everyone around them. The Bathsheba woman, carrying an integrated relationship with her own depths, unconsciously creates the conditions for others to access theirs. You have experienced this in ways that confused you. Strangers on airplanes telling you about their marriages. Colleagues suddenly weeping in your office about their childhoods. Friends revealing the thing they swore they would never say aloud, and choosing you as the one to hear it. This is not coincidence. This is your psychic field at work, and the weight of it is real. Because you absorb what others release. You carry their confessions forward even when they walk away lighter. You become the keeper of truths that no one else was strong enough to hold. The Bathsheba archetype has always been the one who holds what others cannot bear. The one whose presence alone creates the space for truth. And the cost of this gift, the exhaustion, the heaviness, the sense of being perpetually full with the weight of other people's unlived lives, is the cost most people never see you paying. The fifth sign is quieter. You change the atmosphere of any room you enter, and you have never fully understood how or why. People shift when you arrive. Conversations deepen. Superficiality becomes harder to maintain. There is something about your presence that acts as a kind of truth serum on the social environment. People either rise to meet the depth you carry, or they leave. This is not something you do deliberately. You are not performing gravitas. You are not trying to be intense. You simply are what you are. And what you are has weight. Psychological weight. Archetypal weight. The kind of weight that bends social space around it, the way mass bends light. Jung would call this the constellation of an archetype in the interpersonal field. When someone carries strong archetypal energy, particularly feminine power, archetypes like the queen, the priestess, or the Bathsheba figure, their presence activates corresponding energies in everyone around them. People feel more. They become more honest. They drop masks faster. You have noticed this. People confess things to you within minutes of meeting you. Strangers tell you their secrets. Colleagues reveal vulnerabilities they show no one else. Children and animals gravitate toward you without explanation. This is not coincidence. This is the environmental effect of carrying integrated archetypal power. Your psyche broadcasts at a frequency that resonates with the deeper layers of other people's unconscious. They feel permission in your presence, permission to be real, to be vulnerable, to be whole. And the cost, because there is always a cost, is that you absorb the emotional discharge this creates. Every confession directed at you, every vulnerability deposited in your space, every atmosphere you transform, all of it requires energy, your energy. And most people never think to ask whether you have enough left for yourself. The sixth sign is perhaps the most telling. At the exact moments when you were most powerful, most clear, most aligned, most true, something intervened to silence you. Not at your weakest moments, not when you were confused or lost, but precisely when you were most dangerous to the existing order. When your clarity threatened to expose what others needed hidden. When your voice was about to name what the system required unnamed. This is the Bathsheba pattern in its institutional form. The silencing does not come because you are wrong. It comes because you are right. And your rightness threatens the power of those who benefit from the current arrangement of silence. You have been interrupted at crucial moments, talked over in meetings where your insight would have changed the direction of the conversation, excluded from decisions that your understanding would have improved, credited after the fact, once your ideas were safely attributed to someone else, or it was more intimate. You were told you were too intense when you spoke truth, too emotional when you named what others refused to see, too much when you expressed the full scope of what you understood. The silencing always correlates with power, never with weakness. You are never told to be quiet when you are being compliant. You are only told to be quiet when you are being accurate. And that correlation is the signature of systemic containment, not personal failing. Jung observed that the collective will always attempt to suppress what threatens its current structure of consciousness. And individuals who carry new consciousness, who embody what the collective has not yet integrated, will always face this suppression. It is not personal, it is archetypal. You are being silenced not because your voice is flawed, but because your voice carries exactly the frequency that would disrupt the arrangement others depend upon. The seventh sign is the most intimate. You feel old. Not physically. Not in terms of exhaustion, though that too, but in terms of knowing. You carry a sense of having been here before, of understanding patterns that your biographical experience alone cannot explain. You feel ancient in a world that rewards novelty. This is not regression. This is not fantasy. In Jungian terms, this is the experience of being in conscious relationship with the collective unconscious, with layers of human experience that precede your individual birth and will outlast your individual death. Women who carry the Bathsheba archetype often report this feeling, a sense of weariness that has nothing to do with their current circumstances, a knowledge that arrives without being learned, a patience that seems borrowed from centuries rather than years. You know things you were never taught. You understand dynamics before they unfold, and this knowing has made you feel separate from your peers since childhood. Not superior, separate. As though you are watching a play you have seen performed many times before. This is the weight of archetypal consciousness. It is real. It is not pathology. It is not dissociation. It is the lived experience of carrying more psychic content than most people encounter in a lifetime, and carrying it alone, because the culture has no framework for what you are. The Bathsheba woman feels ancient because she is in contact with something ancient. The archetype she carries is thousands of years old. The pattern she embodies has played out across countless civilizations, countless stories, countless women whose names were erased or rewritten. And she feels all of them, not as memory, but as resonance, as recognition, as the particular loneliness of knowing that your story is not only yours, If you carry 3 or more of these signs, the early knowing, the relational asymmetry, the emotional absorption, the betrayal by those who desired you, the environmental transformation, the silencing at peak power, the feeling of ancientness, then you are not imagining things. You are not being dramatic. You are not making yourself special. You are recognizing what has always been true about you. And the recognition itself is the first act of reclamation. Because for your entire life, the world has been telling you a story about yourself that was written by people who needed you contained. And you have been living inside that story, uncomfortable, suffocated, diminished, without realizing that the discomfort was not your flaw. It was your power pressing against the walls of a narrative too small to hold it. And once you see how deeply this runs, the question becomes what to do about it. There is a question I want you to sit with. Which of these 7 signs did you recognize first, not intellectually, but in your body? Which one made something tighten in your chest, or brought a specific memory flooding back before you could stop it? Write it in the comments. You do not need to explain the full story. You do not need to justify why it matters. Just name the sign. And if you are willing, name the age you were when you first felt it. Because naming it is not a small thing. Naming what has been unnamed for years, sometimes decades, is the first fracture in the container that was built around you. It is the beginning of authoring your own story instead of living inside one that was written to keep you manageable. And if this is the kind of work you want to continue, subscribe. What comes next is the framework that explains why this archetype exists, why it has been suppressed across centuries of storytelling, and what becomes possible when you stop apologizing for carrying it. There is more of this waiting, and it goes deeper every time. Now we go deeper. Because understanding the signs is not enough. You need to understand the system that made those signs necessary, the architecture of containment that has been operating on women like you for thousands of years. The story of Bathsheba, as it is traditionally told, is not a story about Bathsheba at all. It is a story about David, his desire, his sin, his repentance, his dynasty. Bathsheba exists in the narrative only as an object, the beautiful woman on the rooftop, the catalyst for a king's moral crisis. She has no interiority in the traditional telling, no agency, no voice. And this is not accidental. This is the containment architecture in action. When a woman's power is too great to ignore, but too threatening to honor, the system does not destroy her. It rewrites her. It makes her a supporting character in someone else's story. It strips her of motive, of choice, of inner life. It makes her a body seen from a rooftop. Jung understood this mechanism intimately. He wrote about how the collective unconscious manages feminine power through projection and reduction. The Hanima, the feminine principle in the male psyche, is projected onto actual women, reducing them from subjects to screens. They become not who they are, but what the masculine psyche needs them to represent. And when a woman carries genuine archetypal power, when she is not merely a screen for projection but an actual force, the system faces a crisis, because she cannot be reduced without visible violence. She cannot be simplified without obvious distortion. So the containment must become more sophisticated. It becomes narrative. It becomes theological. It becomes cultural. It becomes the story told about her, the story she never authorized, never approved, never even recognized as being about her until it was already calcified into tradition. Jung's concept of the collective shadow illuminates why this containment exists and why it persists across millennia. Every culture has a collective shadow, the qualities, truths, and powers that the dominant consciousness cannot integrate. Whatever threatens the current structure of power gets pushed into shadow. And feminine archetypal power, specifically the kind that is autonomous, self-sourced, and ungovernable, has been in the collective shadow of patriarchal cultures for thousands of years. The Bathsheba archetype represents something the collective masculine psyche simultaneously desires and fears. It desires her power because it recognizes that power as essential, as the missing element without which wholeness is impossible. But it fears that power because integrating it would require the dissolution of the current power structure. And so the culture does what the individual psyche does with shadow material. It projects, it demonizes, it contains. It creates stories that transform the threatening other into something manageable. A temptress, a victim, a cautionary tale. You are living inside the consequences of thousands of years of this projection, the weight you carry, the sense of being too much, the exhaustion of containment, the loneliness of being misread. This is not personal neurosis. This is collective shadow pressing against individual consciousness. You are carrying the unlived power of generations of women who were never allowed to be what they were. When you carry this archetype unconsciously, when you do not know what you are, the cost is devastating. You shrink to fit spaces that were never designed for your dimensions. You apologize for insights that make others uncomfortable. You dim your clarity to preserve relationships with people who cannot tolerate being seen clearly. You exhaust yourself managing the emotional reactions your presence provokes in others, reactions that are not your responsibility, but have always been treated as your problem. You attract partners who want to possess rather than partner with you. You attract institutions that want to use your power while denying you credit. You attract narratives that reduce you to your most consumable elements while discarding your depth. And worst of all, you begin to believe the containment is protection. You mistake the cage for safety. You tell yourself that being small keeps you safe, that being invisible keeps you loved, that being less than what you are is the price of belonging. It is not. It never was. The containment was never for your protection. It was always for theirs. And here is where everything shifts. The Bathsheba story does not end on the rooftop. It does not end with being seen, being taken, being silenced. It ends with a coronation. Bathsheba's son Solomon becomes king, not through violence, not through conquest, but through Bathsheba's strategic action, her navigation of court politics, her confrontation of David in his final days, her insistence that the promise made to her would be honored. She was never only the woman on the rooftop. She was the woman who ensured a dynasty. She was the queen mother whose influence shaped the wisest king in biblical tradition. She was the architect of succession, operating within a system that denied her formal power, yet wielding informal power with precision and patience. If this reframe has shifted something in you, if you have felt the weight of your own story being told by others, and you sense what it would mean to reclaim authorship, a like puts this in front of another woman who needs to hear it today. The Bathsheba archetype, fully lived, is not a story of victimhood. It is a story of power that survives containment, power that operates within restriction, power that outlasts the systems designed to suppress it. And that is your story too. You were never the cautionary tale they made you into. You were always the power they could not contain, learning, adapting, surviving, and ultimately outlasting every narrative that tried to reduce you. The shift from containment to coronation is not about external circumstances changing. It is not about the world finally recognizing you. It is about you finally recognizing yourself and refusing to participate in your own diminishment any longer. This is not a declaration you make once. It is a practice you return to daily. The containment was installed over years, decades, centuries of cultural programming. It does not dissolve with a single insight. It dissolves through repeated conscious choice. The work of reclamation begins with an inner confrontation. You must face every place where you have internalized the containment narrative, every belief that your power is dangerous, every habit of shrinking, every relationship where you perform smallness to earn safety. Jung called this shadow integration, but for the Bathsheba woman, it is more accurately described as power reclamation. You are not integrating something dark or shameful. You are reclaiming something luminous that was forced into shadow by external systems, not by your own psyche. The first practice is narrative authorship. Begin writing your own story, not the story others have told about you, but the story as you experienced it from the inside. Every relationship where you were reduced, write your version. Every moment where you were silenced, write what you would have said. Every time your power was reframed as your flaw, write the truth of what that power actually was. This is not journaling as therapy. This is ontological reclamation. You are rewriting the operating narrative of your life, replacing the version that was authored by those who needed you contained with the version that reflects your actual experience, your actual power, your actual truth.